The rain was not just falling, it was attacking. Sheets of water hammered the thin glass of their South Bronx apartment window, a violent percussion that resonated with the same furious rhythm as the man standing over her. Monique was curled on the cold tile floor. An agonizing pain, sharp and electric, shot up from her left calf. It radiated, climbing her spine, exploding behind her eyes, stealing her breath. She could not even scream. She could only curl tighter, a human knot of misery, trying to make herself small enough to disappear. Her vision blurred, spots dancing in the dim light. But one thing was terrifyingly clear: the gleaming, polished leather of Andre's designer shoes. They were inches from her face, planted firmly on the floor she had just scrubbed. He was a mountain of rage above her, his shadow swallowing her whole. "You dare talk back to me," he hissed. The voice that once whispered promises was now a low, dangerous growl. "You useless parasite." He nudged her ribs with the toe of his shoe, and she choked back a sob. "I only asked you for $50,000. $50,000 for the business." He crouched, his voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a scream. "And you can't even give me that. What good are you? Tell me." Parasite. The word echoed in the space where her heart used to be. She bit her lip, tasting the metallic tang of her own blood. "Parasite," she screamed inside her own head. "I quit my job as a senior analyst, a good job, a job I loved. I did it because you demanded it. I gave you every cent of my savings. I sold the condo my parents left me when we got married, all of it to finance your supposed business. I did everything you asked. I erased myself for you. And now in your eyes I am nothing but a parasite." The pain in her leg throbbed, a sickening counterpoint to the sudden sharp memory. 5 years ago. A different man, or so she had believed. Andre on one knee, not in anger, but in adoration. The restaurant was dim, expensive. His eyes were so sincere, reflecting the candlelight. "Marry me, Mo," he had whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Let me take care of you. You've worked so hard your whole life, ever since your parents. You deserve to be cherished. Let me build a family with you." His promise of care had felt like a fortress. She realized now it was a cage. That sweet promise was a lie, and it lay shattered on the floor, as broken as the bone in her leg. A brutal yank snapped her back to the present. Andre's fingers twisted into her hair, pulling her head back with a force that sent a crackle of pain down her neck. She was limp, a doll in his grip. His handsome face, the one she had loved so much, was contorted with rage, red and horribly deformed. "Where is the money from the house?" He spat his face close to hers. "The house your adoptive parents left you. You sold it, didn't you? You sold it and kept the money behind my back. Confess, right now." The house. That was the last legacy from her parents. But she had sold it 3 years ago. She sold it to pay for his heart surgery. A sudden critical illness that required the best doctors he had claimed. An illness that vanished the moment the money transferred. He had already forgotten. He had absorbed that sacrifice, that final piece of her past, and simply forgotten it. She didn't have the strength to explain it again. The pain in her leg was a black hole consuming her consciousness. "Please," she whispered, the words tearing at her raw throat. Tears and sweat mixed, running into her mouth. "Please, Andre, stop. My leg. It hurts so much. I think it's broken." Andre let out a sound. It was not a laugh. It was a cold, chilling puff of air. "Let it hurt," he said, his voice flat. "Maybe that'll knock some sense into you." He let go of her hair. Her head slammed hard against the tile floor, the impact sending a fresh wave of nausea through her. He spat those cold words, then walked away. He walked over to the sofa and picked up his mobile phone. Monique watched through a fog of agony. And then, as if a switch had been flipped, his entire demeanor changed. He was another person. His back was to her, but his voice when he spoke was incredibly sweet. It was the voice he used to use for her, full of love and warmth. "Yes, my love, I got the call," he cooed into the phone. "I'm just wrapping up a work matter. As soon as I finish, I'm coming to see you and our son." Our son. The words hung in the stale, rain-soaked air. Monique felt her heart stop. It did not stutter. It simply stopped beating. She could not have misheard. Our son. What son? Who was he talking to? In that instant, a strange and terrible thing happened. The excruciating throb in her leg vanished. The fire in her calf, the splitting pain in her skull, it all disappeared. It was replaced by an icy, spreading numbness, a psychic shock so profound it obliterated all physical sensation. She was no longer a woman in pain. She was a ghost, listening to the death of her entire life. A muffled sound, a tiny choked gasp that was not the wind. The icy paralysis holding Monique shattered, her head still throbbing from the impact with the floor turned toward the sound. Andre was still cooing into his phone, his back to the room, lost in his new secret life. She was there, standing in the sliver of light from the hallway, hiding behind the slightly open door to her bedroom. Amara, her 4-year-old daughter. Her eyes were round 2 dark pools of undiluted terror. Her small tan hands were clamped hard over her own mouth, trying to hold back the sobs that shook her entire body. She had seen. Oh God, she had seen everything. In that moment, the pain in Monique's leg, the agony in her skull, the sting of the word parasite, all of it evaporated. It was replaced by a shame so profound, so suffocating it stole the air from her lungs. This was a new bottom. Her own humiliation was one thing, but for her child to witness this, to see her mother kicked and spat on, to see her crawl, this was an agony beyond bone. Andre must have heard the sound too. His sweet, loving tone vanished. "Yes, I'll call you back," he snapped, ending the call. He turned, and the mask of rage returned instantly, now directed at the smallest person in the room. "And why are you crying?" he roared at Amara. The sound was deafening in the small apartment. "Stop making noise. Go back to your room. Close the door." Amara trembled, shaking so violently, Monique thought she might fall. But she did not move. Her little feet were frozen to the floor. Her terrified gaze was locked on Monique, a silent, desperate plea. And in that gaze, beneath the terror, Monique saw it. A spark. An intelligence beyond her 4 years. A desperate, insane idea flared in Monique's mind. A gamble. Andre was distracted, walking back toward the window to light a cigarette, his back to them both. Monique looked directly at her daughter. Fighting back the pain, she subtly, almost imperceptibly, shook her head. "No, do not cry." Then a desperate, pleading look. She darted her eyes from Amara to her own mobile phone resting on the small side table next to the sofa. "Can she understand?" Monique prayed. "She is only 4. Please, baby, please understand me." Amara looked at her mother. She looked at the phone. She blinked once. Then she gave a single tiny nod, a gesture so small that only Monique could have seen it. Taking advantage of Andre's back being turned, Amara moved. She was barefoot, and as silent as a kitten, she crept toward the sofa. Monique's heart was not beating. It was exploding. It hammered against her ribs, a wild bird in a cage. Please don't let him turn around. Please, God, do not let him turn around. When Amara got close to the side table, she executed her plan with a genius that stunned her mother. She let out a small, convincing shout. "Ouch!" She pretended to trip, falling forward. Her small hand shot out, striking the phone. It sailed off the table, landing with a soft, muffled thud on the thick area rug. "How clumsy you are!" Andre yelled without even turning around. His voice was thick with irritation. "Get back to bed. Now." Amara quickly scrambled to her feet. But instead of going to her room, she picked up the phone, hugged it tight against her small chest, and ducked under the side table. She vanished into the shadows, completely out of Andre's sight. Monique watched, holding her breath. She saw the small, trembling hands. The screen lit up, illuminating the terror on Amara's face. She saw Amara's tiny finger begin to press the screen. The password. It was her date of birth. Monique had taught it to her just in case. In case of an emergency, she had said. If Mommy falls in the shower, if there is a fire. She had never imagined the emergency would be the man she married. Amara's finger tapped the contacts icon. She slid the list with her tiny finger. She stopped at the name. Beloved Grandpa. She brought the phone to her ear, her lips pressed tight. She was trying to speak, but she was too terrified. No sound came out. "Speak, baby," Monique begged silently, tears streaming down her face. "Please, please speak." And finally a sound, a shaky, choked whisper that would haunt Monique's dreams for the rest of her life. "Grandpa, Grandpa, Mommy is going to die." Silence. 1 second, 2 seconds, an eternity of dead air. Monique was about to despair. Then a voice came through the small speaker. It was a whisper, but it was deep, warm, and crackled with absolute authority. It was a voice that commanded armies. "Amara, my girl, you did so well. Can you tell Grandpa where you are now?" That voice. It was a bomb that shattered Monique's paralyzing terror. She was no longer alone. She scrambled forward, ignoring the fire in her leg, dragging herself across the cold tile until she was close to the table. She pressed her mouth near the phone her daughter was holding. Her voice trembled, but it was clear. "Pops, it's Monique. We are at..." She gasped the address of the modest apartment, the hell that had become her prison. The voice on the other end showed no hesitation. "Understood." It was the sound of granite. "Lock yourselves in a room. Lock the door tightly. Do not open it for anyone. Do you hear me? Not even your husband. Grandpa is coming there." The call cut off. The screen went dark. Amara crawled out from under the table, still clutching the phone. She looked at Monique, her eyes still filled with tears. But for the first time that night, the terror was mixed with a tiny flickering light. It was hope. Andre was still on the other side of the apartment, his voice a low murmur on his phone. Monique did not care. She pushed past the agony, her teeth clamped together, and scooped Amara into her arms. She carried her daughter into the small, windowless bathroom and clicked the lock. She sat on the edge of the tub, holding Amara on her lap. Her leg throbbed, a deep, sickening pulse that matched the frantic hammering in her chest. She turned on the tap, letting the water run a weak attempt to drown out the world. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, her voice a raw, shaking thing. "It's okay. We are just playing a game, a hiding game." Amara did not cry. She was rigid in Monique's arms, her small body vibrating with a terror so deep it had stolen her voice. Monique wiped the tear tracks from her daughter's face, her own tears blurring her vision. She had to be calm. She had to be strong. "He is coming. Pops is coming." Time dripped by, measured in the pounding of the rain and the throb of her broken bone. 10 minutes. 15. Andre had banged on the door, once yelled for her to come out, then apparently given up, likely returning to his phone call. Then a new sound cut through the storm. It was not a normal city sound. It was the deep, coordinated rumble of several high-end engines. Not the roar of a cheap motorcycle, but the synchronized purr of heavy, expensive sedans entering the narrow alley below. The sound was followed by the sharp screech of brakes, then the decisive heavy thud of multiple car doors closing in unison. Monique's heart leaped. It's him. It has to be him. Before she could react, she heard new sounds from the hallway outside her apartment. Heavy, rhythmic footsteps, not Andre's erratic stomping. These were measured, imposing, intimidating steps. Just then, the door of the apartment across the hall burst open. The shrill, nasal voice of the landlady cried out, "What is all this racket at this hour of the night? Who are you people looking for?" Her voice was a weapon in this building, one Monique heard her use daily. But then it just stopped. It was not a pause. It was cut off, as if a hand had been clamped over her mouth, replaced by a sudden sharp gasp. Monique hobbled to the apartment door, ignoring the fire in her leg. She pressed her eye to the peephole. The distorted view was something out of a movie. Facing the stunned landlady was not one person. There were 4 burly men in identical immaculate black suits, their expressions as impassive as stone, and in the center of them, flanked like a head of state, was Robert Pops Sterling. This was not the kind grandfather she remembered from childhood Christmases, the man who smelled of cigars and peppermint. He wore a perfectly tailored gray suit, his back ramrod straight. He leaned on a heavy ebony cane with a gleaming silver handle. His hair was completely white, but his eyes, even through the peephole, shone with a penetrating, authoritative light. He radiated an aura of such absolute power that no one would dare look him straight in the eye. The landlady certainly did not. "Where is Monique's apartment?" he asked. His voice was not loud, but it had a weight that seemed to suck the air from the hallway, a deep baritone that commanded silence. The landlady, trembling, pointed a shaky finger toward Monique's door. Pops nodded once. "Monique," he called, his voice now softened but firm. "It's Pops. Open the door." Hearing his familiar, safe voice, she fumbled with the 3 locks, her hand shaking. The door swung open. She saw his face, the deep lines of concern etched around his eyes, and she could not hold on any longer. The adrenaline, the terror, the strength that had held her together evaporated. She collapsed, sobbing into his arms. "Pops!" He hugged her tightly, his large, warm hand patting her trembling back. "Quiet now, little one," he murmured. "It is all over. Pops is here. No one will ever hurt you again." Just then, the angry growl of Andre's motorcycle sounded at the street entrance. He must have finished talking to his mistress. He saw the luxury sedans blocking the alley. He saw the men in black standing outside his door, his face visible in the dim hallway light turned a pasty paper white. He parked the bike carelessly and ran toward them shouting, "What's going on? Who are you people?" He saw Monique in Pops's arms, and his bewilderment turned to pure aggressive rage. He pointed a rude finger at Pops. "Monique, who is this old man?" Pops turned slowly. His eyes, sharp as blades, pierced Andre. His gaze was so cold it seemed to freeze the humid air. "So you are Andre," he said, his voice deep and grave. Andre, still not realizing who he was dealing with, maintained his aggressive stance. "So what? Who do you think you are breaking into my home?" Pops's gaze did not waver. "Who I am is not important," he said. "What is important is what you just did to my granddaughter." As he finished speaking, his gaze fell deliberate and cold on Monique's swollen, misshapen leg, visible beneath the hem of her pajamas. One of the bodyguards beside him understood the signal instantly. He stepped forward. His voice was icy official. "Andre Garrett, you are under arrest for domestic violence. You need to come with us." "What?" Andre sputtered, his fake confidence shattering. "Domestic violence. You cannot. You have no proof." "The proof," Pop said quietly, his voice resonating with finality, "is the injuries on my granddaughter's body, and the cry for help from my great-granddaughter." Andre was speechless, pale as a ghost. As 2 bodyguards approached and held Andre firmly by the arms, he began to struggle. "What are you doing? Let go of me. Monique, say something." Monique just looked at him silent. The love was gone. There was only contempt and cold, empty indifference. Pop signaled to another bodyguard who immediately handed a thick envelope of cash to the landlady. "This should cover the rent this man owes you," Pop said, "and compensate you for the inconvenience. As of now, what happened here never happened. Understood?" The landlady, seeing the envelope, widened her eyes and nodded repeatedly. Yes, of course. I saw nothing. I know nothing." Another bodyguard helped Monique walk, supporting her weight. They led her to one of the luxury sedans. Inside, a woman in a white coat was waiting. "She's the family doctor," Pops explained gently. "She'll give you first aid." The car pulled away slowly, its tires gliding silently over the wet pavement, leaving the modest apartment and a violent, screaming husband being taken away by law. The luxury sedan glided through the city night, its movement so smooth it felt more like floating than driving. It was a world away from the rattling subway cars Monique was used to, a universe away from the terrifying vibration of Andre's old motorcycle. In the silent, plush interior, the doctor had worked efficiently. She had disinfected the deep cuts, examined the grotesque swelling of Monique's leg, and immobilized it. "No fracture, fortunately," she had murmured. "But severe soft tissue damage. It will require weeks of rest." Amara, utterly depleted by the night's extreme terror, had fallen into a deep, heavy sleep in her great-grandfather's arms. Seeing her angel-like face, her chest rising and falling rhythmically, Monique's heart squeezed. If it had not been for Amara's call, what would have become of them tonight? They arrived at an imposing classic-style mansion in the Hamptons, Pops's residence, a place she had visited only a few times, a place that belonged to a life she felt she had no claim to. Upon entering, the silent, solemn atmosphere of the house calmed her in a way she had not felt in years. Pops led her to a spacious room on the second floor. "This was your adoptive mother's room," he said, his deep voice softened by the quiet. "From now on, this is your home." A staff member helped her lay the sleeping Amara on the large, soft bed. After they left, Monique stood alone in the silence. The room was meticulously cared for, smelling faintly of lavender and old books. And there on the desk, still in its silver frame, was the photo. Her adoptive parents, Franklin and Martha Patterson, smiling on a beach vacation. Their arms were around a skinny, gap-toothed 10-year-old version of herself. The dam of her composure broke. She sank onto the small bench by the desk, covered her face, and wept. These were not the tears of pain or terror from the apartment. These were tears of grief, of shame, tears for the girl in the photograph and for the woman she had allowed herself to become. Her past rushed back at her, a lifetime of memories colliding with the brutal present. She remembered the vague, gray feeling of the orphanage, the feeling of being abandoned, of not belonging to anyone. Then the day Frank and Martha Patterson walked in. They were not rich. They were civil servants, kind and quiet, and they had chosen her. Her father Franklin was an engineer, a man of few words who adored his wife and daughter. Her mother Martha was a primary school teacher who taught her right from wrong, who held her when she had nightmares. Their home was always full of love. And then there was Pops, Robert Sterling, the CEO of the construction group where her father worked and his best friend. Pops had been widowed young and had no children of his own. He had a special fondness for her, treating her like the granddaughter he never had. He came to every Christmas laden with gifts. He paid for her entire education from grade school through college, waving off her parents' protests. "Investing in education is never a bad investment," he would say, stroking her hair. Tragedy struck in her final year of college. Her parents, on a rare business trip together, died in an unexpected traffic accident. Her world collapsed. In her darkest, most desperate moment, it was Pops who handled everything. He arranged the funeral. He consoled her. He held her as she shook apart, and he said the words that became her anchor. "Your parents are gone, but you still have me. From now on, consider me your family." He helped her get a stable job at one of his subsidiaries. Her life slowly regained its footing. The sadness began to fade. And then she met Andre. He was new in the sales department, 2 years older than her. He was tall, handsome, and impossibly charming. He was eloquent, ambitious. He told her about his difficult childhood, how hard he had fought for everything he had. She, still aching from the loss of her family, desperate for a place to lean, fell for his apparent sincerity and determination. She fell for the promise of a new family. She remembered perfectly the look on Pops's face the first time she introduced them. He said nothing. He just observed Andre in silence. That night he called her into his study. "Monique," he said, his voice grave. "That young man seems smart, but his eyes aren't honest. I can't interfere in your love life, but be careful." Blinded by love, she did not pay attention. She thought Pops was just being mistrustful, that he did not understand. They married a year later. Pops gave her a luxurious condo on Park Avenue and a considerable sum of cash as a dowry. Andre, seeing his opportunity, showed her a convincing business plan. He did not want to live off her family, he claimed. He wanted to build something of his own. Trusting him, believing in him, she gave him all her savings. She even sold the condo Pops had given her to finance his dream. When Amara was born, Andre said she should stay home. He would manage the finances. She agreed. That was the beginning of her tragedy. The business never seemed to do well. He constantly complained, asked for more money. His attitude began to change. He became irritable. The arguments became frequent. Then one night, he hit her. He was drunk, he cried, he apologized. She forgave him. But then it became a habit. He used her as a punching bag. She endured it all for Amara, for the tiny dying hope that the man she loved would return. She snapped back to the present. The room was dark, but the first rays of morning were beginning to filter through the curtains. She had fallen asleep right there on the bench, her head on the desk. She realized with a jolt that she had slept deeply. For the first time in years, she had slept without nightmares, without waking at every creak, without fear. She stood, her body aching, the pain in her leg, a dull, throbbing reminder. She walked to the large vanity mirror, her reflection emerging in the gray light. The woman in the mirror was haggard. Her eyes were swollen and red. Her face was pale, and a faint, ugly bruise was blooming on her cheek, a ghost of Andre's slap. She looked broken, a victim. But as she stared into her own exhausted eyes, she saw something else. Deep within the swollen purple flesh, a tiny flame began to burn. It was not just anger, it was determination. It was the resilience her parents had taught her. It was the strength Pops had invested in. She could not keep living like this. She had to change. For herself, and for the little girl sleeping peacefully in the bed behind her. After a long, hot shower, Monique dressed in the clean loungewear a staff member had prepared for her. The pain in her leg was a dull, throbbing baseline beneath the clarity of her thoughts. When she went downstairs, Amara was already in the grand dining room, seated in a booster chair, happily eating pancakes. A kind-looking woman in a neat uniform was cutting them into small pieces for her. Amara, seeing her mother, smiled. It was a watery, uncertain smile, but it was a start. Pops was at the head of the long mahogany table, reading a physical newspaper, a cup of black coffee at his elbow. He looked up as she entered, his kind smile returning. "Did you rest, granddaughter? Come sit down. Eat. I'd like you to meet Mr. Franklin. He is my personal attorney and my most trusted friend." A middle-aged man with sharp, intelligent eyes and an impeccable suit stood up and shook her hand courteously. His grip was firm. "Ms. Patterson," he said, using her maiden name. "Good morning. Mr. Sterling has already filled me in. I deeply regret what happened, but I am glad you got out of there." And during breakfast, the atmosphere was not heavy. They did not dig into the wound. They spoke of Amara's school of the weather, of small, normal things. They were giving her space to breathe, to simply exist in safety. Afterward, Amara was taken to the garden by the housekeeper to look at the flowers, and the three adults retired to Pops's study. It was a true war room. The walls were lined floor to ceiling with books, the air thick with the smell of old paper and leather. It was solemn and intellectual. Pop sat behind his massive desk. "Monique," he began, his voice now serious, all kindness replaced by a focused intensity. "This is no time for lamenting. We have to act, and very quickly." Mr. Franklin continued, opening his briefcase and pulling out a sheath of papers. "Monique," he said, his tone professional. "Following Mr. Sterling's instructions, we have conducted a preliminary investigation into Andre Garrett's situation. The first thing we did this morning was file an emergency freeze order on all bank accounts in both your names." Monique felt a bitter, hollow laugh escape her. "Joint assets." She shook her head, the old shame flooding back, Andre's voice echoing in her ear. "Parasite." "Mr. Franklin, there are no joint assets. It's impossible. We have nothing left. I gave him everything." Her voice grew small, the voice of the woman on the floor. "All my savings, all the money from the sale of my parents' condo, I gave it all to him for his business. There is nothing." Mr. Franklin gave a small professional smile. "Not necessarily," he said gently. "Legally, you are still married, so we must review everything. But our primary goal right now is not to see what is left. It is to trace where the money you gave him actually ended up." Pops nodded, his fingers steepled. "Exactly. That scoundrel couldn't have simply failed in a business. There has to be more to it. Franklin, I want you to investigate all his financial movements for the last 3 years. Leave no stone unturned." "Of course, Mr. Sterling," Franklin replied. He then turned back to Monique, his expression sobering. "We have someone watching him. He was released on bail about an hour ago." Monique's stomach clenched. He was out. He was free. "The strange thing is," Mr. Franklin continued, looking down at his notes, He does not seem worried or nervous at all. In fact, just this morning, one of our men saw him at an upscale cafe on the Upper East Side. He was with a woman. Monique's blood ran cold. The phone call. "I'm coming to see you and our son. It was real. It was all real." Pops watched her, his eyes missing nothing. He saw the flicker of pain, and he saw the ice that replaced it. He leaned forward. "Monique," he said, his voice deep and grave. "This is your fight. I will back you whatever you choose, but you must choose. We can pursue the divorce, get a settlement, and let this go. It will be quiet. You and Amara will be safe and wealthy for the rest of your lives. You would never have to see him again." He paused, letting the offer of peace settle in the room. "Or," he continued, his eyes sharp as flint, "do you want to go all the way? Do you want to expose the true face of that man and get justice for the years you suffered?" Monique looked at Pops. She looked at Mr. Franklin. She thought of the bruise on her cheek, the fire in her leg. She thought of Amara trembling, hiding under that small table. She thought of the sweet, loving voice he used for his other family, the family he built with her money. The flame that had ignited in the mirror that morning roared into an inferno. She lifted her chin. Her voice, when she spoke, was no longer trembling. It was not the voice of a victim. It was the voice of a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to reclaim. It was a voice as cold and hard as steel. "I want to go all the way." She met Pops's gaze without blinking. "I want him to pay for everything." Pops held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded, a slow, satisfied smile spreading across his face. "Well said, my granddaughter. Then let us begin." The first few days in the Hamptons were a disorienting blur of legal consultations, medical examinations, and the strange, forgotten sensation of safety. Monique's leg was immobilized. The deep purple bruise on her cheek was fading to a sickly yellow, and Amara was slowly, cautiously beginning to explore the grand, quiet hallways of the mansion. Monique's phone, now in the possession of one of Pops's discreet personal assistants, lit up relentlessly. It was Andre. The messages, which the assistant logged and forwarded directly to Mr. Franklin without Monique having to read them, were a toxic, predictable cycle. First, the desperate begging. "Mo, baby, please talk to me. That old man is poisoning you against me. I miss you. I miss our family. This is all a misunderstanding." Then the righteous indignation. "You froze the accounts. After everything I did for you, you are destroying everything I built for us. You are killing me, Monique. You are killing the business. And finally, the threats. You think you can just keep my daughter from me? You think you can just hide behind him? You have no idea who you're messing with. You'll regret this, Mo. I swear to God you will." Monique ignored it all. Each new message was just another file for Mr. Franklin, another nail in Andre's legal coffin. She was insulated from his noise, focusing on her physical therapy, on relearning how to walk without a limp, and on holding Amara through her nightmares. On the 5th day, her new secure personal phone rang. It was not the assistant. It was a number she knew by heart. Leon Patterson, her adoptive brother. At 30 years old, he was 5 years her junior and had always been the softer one. Where Monique was resilient, built to withstand, Leon was impressionable, built to bend. He was good-hearted, but fundamentally weak, perpetually in some kind of financial trouble, and fatally prone to admiring the wrong kind of strength. For the last 5 years, he had idolized Andre. Andre, with his flashy suits, his easy charm, his talk of big deals and bigger money, was everything Leon wished he could be. Monique felt a familiar, heavy exhaustion settle over her before she even answered. She knew exactly why he was calling. "Leon," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Mo, hey sis." His voice was nervous, high-pitched. "Look, I know you're going through some stuff. I heard you and Andre had a fight." A dark, bitter laugh almost escaped Monique's lips. "A fight, Leon? Is that what he called it? He broke my leg." There was a pause. She could hear him shifting, uncomfortable. "What number, Mo? That's crazy. Andre wouldn't do that. He's not like that." There it was, the automatic defense, the willful blindness. "He called me Mo. Leon rushed on, his words tumbling out. "He's worried sick about you. He said that old man Robert Sterling, he's got you locked up in that mansion. He said Pops is brainwashing you, trying to steal your family." A cold fury different from the hot rage Andre inspired washed over Monique. It was the endless, suffocating exhaustion of having to manage everyone's perception of her abuser. "Leon," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Stop. Do not believe a single word that man tells you. He is a liar. He is a monster." "A monster, Mo. He's my friend. He's been good to me." The defensiveness in his voice was rising. "He said you're ruining his business. He said this is all just some huge misunderstanding about the accounts. He said, if you just sign this one paper, just one, the bank will release the funds so he can make payroll. He's got guys who won't get paid, Mo. Families." Monique's eyes narrowed. The fog of exhaustion vanished, replaced by sharp, cold clarity. "What paper, Leon? What exactly did he ask you to do?" He needs you to sign it," Leon stammered. "He said you won't take his calls, that Pops has you guarded. He just needs you to sign the release." The real reason was coming. She waited for it. "And Mo, look." His voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "You know I owed him that money. For the car repairs. It was like $2,000. He said if I can help him, if I can just get you to see reason, he'll wipe the slate clean. He'll forgive the debt." There it was. The hook, the bribe, the manipulation. Andre knew Leon was in debt to him. He was using Leon, her brother, the last piece of her old family, as a pawn. He was trying to use her love for her brother against her just as he had used her love for him. The betrayal was staggering. It was not just Andre anymore. Leon, in his weakness, was allowing himself to be a weapon aimed directly at her. The small, weak part of her that wanted to cry had vanished. The woman Pops was training the executive took its place. Her voice dropped, becoming as cold and hard as the marble mantelpiece across the room. "Leon, listen to me, and listen very closely, because I will only say this once. You are being used." "Mo, I just thought—" "You will not sign anything," she commanded, cutting him off. "You will not forge my signature. You will not talk to him again. That man is a criminal. He didn't just fight me. He beat me. He stole every single dollar my parents left me, and he did it while building a secret second family with another woman." Another family, Mo, that's insane. He would never—" "Do you understand me, Leon?" she pressed, ignoring his denial. "You are being implicated in a felony. If you help him, you will be an accomplice to fraud. And I swear to God, when this all comes down, I will not be able to protect you. I will not be able to save you from him. Do you understand?" There was a long, terrible silence on the other end of the line, filled only by the sound of Leon's shaky, shallow breathing. "Yes," he whispered. He sounded terrified. "Yes, Mo, I didn't know." "Now you do," Monique said, and ended the call. She stood shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so profound it made her feel calm. The audacity, the sheer naked audacity of that man. He would burn her entire world down, including her brother, just to stay warm. She immediately picked up the secure line Pops had given her. It rang once. "Franklin? Mr. Franklin, it's Monique. We have a new problem. It's my brother Leon Patterson. Andre is trying to use him." She explained the call, the debt, the desperate request for a signature on a bank release. "I need to know legally," she said, her voice tight, "how exposed my brother is. I need you to find out exactly what Andre has on him. This is not just about me anymore. He is pulling my family into his criminal enterprise." She hung up. The fight just got bigger. The pressure was mounting. This was not just a divorce. It was an exorcism, and Andre was a demon determined to take everyone down with him. Mr. Franklin arrived at the mansion 2 days after the call with Leon. He did not come for small talk. He carried a heavy leather briefcase and requested the study immediately. Pops and Monique met him there. He laid a thick stack of papers on the center of Pops's mahogany desk. "We found it," he said, his voice clipped and professional. "We traced the money." Monique leaned forward, her hands gripping the edge of the desk. "It's all here," Franklin said, tapping the top sheet. "Every wire transfer. Every check you ever wrote to him. The proceeds from the sale of your condo. The cash inheritance from your parents." He looked her directly in the eye. "The total, Monique, exceeds $500,000. The number hung in the air, obscene and impossible. $500,000. It was everything she had. It was her past and her security, and she had handed it to him piece by piece. It wasn't invested in any construction project. Franklin continued, his voice void of emotion. It was not put into any legitimate business fund. He turned over several pages, revealing a complex flowchart of names and account numbers. Instead, the money was moved. It was divided, routed through 3 different shell accounts in Delaware, a classic laundering scheme, and then finally, it all flowed into a single account. He stopped at the final page. It was a corporate filing document. This account belongs to a legal entity, a limited liability company formed just over 3 years ago. It is called Golden Future Investments and Development, LLC. Monique's breath caught in her throat. Golden Future. The name was a sickening, cruel joke. And the legal representative of this company, Mr. Franklin said, sliding another document forward, the sole administrator with signature authority is not Andre Garrett. Monique held her breath. She already knew, but she had to see it. Her eyes scanned the page, landing on the administrator section. The name was printed in clear, bold type. Vanessa Hayes. She read aloud the name, tasting like ash in her mouth. "The same woman from the cafe," Franklin confirmed. "The woman he was with the morning after his arrest." A cold, heavy rage, unlike anything she had ever felt, began to settle in her stomach. It was not the hot flash of anger she felt with Andre. This was a deep, glacial fury. A shell company. He had used her money, her parents' legacy, to build a golden future for his mistress. He had drained her dollar by dollar to fund a life he was actively hiding from her. The next day, Mr. Franklin called. His voice was different. The professional distance was gone, replaced by something somber, almost cautious. "Monique, I am in my office in the city. I think you need to come here. We have found some new discoveries, and I believe it would be better if you saw them yourself." An hour later, she was sitting in his sterile high-rise conference room overlooking the Manhattan skyline. The city looked gray and hostile. "Please have a seat," he said, his voice gentle. "What you are about to see might be quite shocking. You need to prepare yourself." Monique just nodded, gripping her hands in her lap. "Tell me. I can handle whatever it is." Mr. Franklin sighed. He turned his laptop screen toward her. "We investigated Vanessa Hayes further, and her relationship with Andre. They did not meet recently." He pressed a key. The first photo appeared on the screen. It was Andre and Vanessa walking hand in hand on a beach in Miami. They were laughing, tanned, carefree. Andre was kissing her temple. "The date stamp," Franklin said quietly. "Look at the date stamp." Monique's eyes focused on the small yellow numbers in the corner. It was dated 3 years ago. 3 years. It was the exact week she had sold her parents' condo. It was the exact week Andre was supposedly in a private hospital recovering from his critical heart surgery. The lie was so profound, so complete, it took her breath away. The money she had cried over, the money she had practically begged her father's memory to forgive her for spending, had been used for this, a romantic getaway with his mistress. "That is not the worst part," Mr. Franklin said. He clicked to the next photo. And the next. The images blurred together, a montage of a life she never knew existed. Andre tenderly feeding a chubby, smiling baby boy. Andre patiently teaching that same boy, now a toddler, how to walk in a luxurious, sun-drenched apartment she had never seen. Andre, Vanessa, and the child, all 3 of them smiling radiantly, their faces close together. They were blowing out birthday candles on a bright blue cake. A large frosted number sat in the center of the cake, the number 2. Monique stared, her mind unable to process the domestic bliss. "Who?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Who is that child?" Mr. Franklin's voice was solemn. "He is the son of Andre Garrett and Vanessa Hayes. His name is Micah. He is over 2 years old." Micah. The name was a cruel echo of her own daughter's. Amara. So that was it. That was the phone call. That was the true face of the devoted husband she had sacrificed everything to support. He did not just have a mistress, he had a family. He was the father of another child. The money she had saved, the beating she had taken, the insults she had swallowed, it was all to support his second wife, his real son. She had not been a wife. She had been a cash cow, a stupid, diligent animal, working to fund the happiness of others. This truth was more painful than any kick. It was an insult, a humiliation that eclipsed all the others. Monique sat motionless. Tears began to stream down her face, hot and silent. But this time they were not tears of weakness. They were not tears of a broken heart. Her heart was not broken. It was gone. Obliterated. These were tears for her own profound, unforgivable stupidity. They were tears for her completely and utterly defrauded youth. She wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand, her gaze turning as cold and hard as the glass wall beside her. "He won't just lose custody, Mr. Franklin," she said, her voice perfectly even stripped of all emotion. "That is not enough." She looked him in the eye, and the man who had seen everything was taken aback by the sheer cold force of her will. "I want him to pay for the crimes of fraud and embezzlement. I want him, and I want that woman to be socially destroyed. I want them ruined." The revelation of Andre's second family had settled inside Monique like a block of ice. The grief was over. The love had evaporated. All that remained was a cold, hard resolve that waited for its moment. That moment came a few days later. Monique was in the bright sunroom, her bandaged leg propped on an ottoman, reading the preliminary financial reports from Mr. Franklin. A staff member entered, her expression uneasy. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "there is a woman at the front gate, a Mrs. Clarissa Garrett. She says she is your mother-in-law and she is causing a scene." Monique felt nothing. No dread, no surprise. Andre's failed attempts to contact her, his threats, and his pleading had led to this. He had deployed his mother. "Let her in," Monique said, her voice calm. She folded the report. "Show her in here, and then please leave us." Moments later, Clarissa burst into the room. She did not walk. She ran, her face already crumpled into a mask of theatrical agony. She was not aiming for a chair. She was aiming for Monique's feet. She collapsed onto the expensive rug, a heap of manufactured sorrow, and grabbed Monique's legs. "Oh, Sophia, my daughter," she wailed, using Monique's old name, the name of the girl she thought was weak. "How can you be so cruel? How can you do this to my son? Do you want to kill my Andre?" It was a completely unexpected drama, a performance so over the top, Monique was almost impressed. "Mother-in-law, please get up," Monique said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "Tell me calmly what is happening." "No," Clarissa sobbed, clinging tighter, her tears soaking Monique's pajama pants. "I will not get up until you promise to forgive my Damon. My Andre, he is my only son. If anything happens to him, what will become of me?" The performance continued a monologue of lies. She said Andre was devastated. He was not eating. He was not sleeping. He was only drinking. His business, the business he had worked so hard to build for her for Amara, was paralyzed. She said he loved Monique, that everything he had done was just a mistake, a simple loss of temper from stress. "He was wrong to hit you. I will not justify it," Clarissa pleaded, looking up with what she thought were sincere, tear-filled eyes. "But after he did it, his heart was broken too. He is regretful. You are his wife. How can you push your own husband into the abyss? You froze his accounts. You reported him. If he goes to jail, who will take care of our Isla, our Amara? Who will be responsible for her future?" Every word was a carefully aimed dart, designed to strike her old weak points. The matrimonial bond, the child's future, the image of a remorseful husband on the verge of ruin. If she had not seen the photos, if she had not known about Micah, if she had not seen the bank statements for $500,000, she might have fallen for it. But now she could only laugh to herself. Monique calmly, firmly peeled Clarissa's hands off her legs and pushed her ottoman back, creating a space between them. She stared down at the woman acting on her floor. "Clarissa," she said. Her voice was cold. It was unfamiliar even to her. "You do not have to keep acting. That drama does not work on me anymore." Clarissa froze. The sobs stopped, cut off mid-wail. She looked up from the floor, and in an instant, the mask of the grieving mother vanished. The sadness in her eyes was replaced by sharp, naked surprise. Then that surprise curdled into pure, unadulterated fury. "What?" she hissed, her voice suddenly coarse and low. "What did you say to me?" "I'll go back and tell your son," Monique continued, her voice like ice, "that if he is truly repentant, he should go to the courthouse and confess everything. If he plans to continue this charade, we will see each other in court." Clarissa scrambled to her feet, her face now free of fake tears contorted with rage. You insolent viper!" Her voice was no longer pleading. It was a snarl. "It was a bad day when my Damon, my Andre married trash like you. Do you think because you have money now, because you have this old man protecting you, you can trample on my family? You will see. You will not get away with this." She began to utter all kinds of insults, curses Monique had never heard from her, but they no longer hurt. They were just noise. Monique watched her in silence, as if observing a rabid animal behind thick glass. Monique pressed a small button on the intercom. "Please call an employee," she said, her voice perfectly level. "Escort this lady out." Two of Pops's security men entered the room instantly. Clarissa struggled and screamed as they firmly took her by the arms. "You'll regret this, you rotten thing. I swear I won't stand idly by." Her voice echoed down the hall as she was removed from the mansion. The house returned to calm, but a storm was churning inside Monique. Clarissa's performance had failed, but it had made one thing crystal clear. They would not give up. Greed and selfishness were rooted deep in their bones. That sentimental farce had failed, which meant a more vile attack would come next. She realized sitting there in the quiet sunroom that she could not just be defensive. She could not just be a victim hiding in a mansion waiting for lawyers to fix her life, waiting for them to attack again. She had to transform. She was no longer Monique Garrett, the stay-at-home mom. She was no longer Andre's wife. She had to become someone else, someone they could not touch. She had to become Monique Sterling. That evening, she went to Pop's study. "Pops," she said, "I am done hiding. I want to work. I want my old life back. I want a seat at the table, your table." Pops looked at her a long, appraising gaze. He smiled. "I thought you'd never ask." The next morning, the transformation began. Pops did not just hire a stylist, he summoned an army. The best stylists, designers, and makeup artists in New York descended upon the mansion. They brought racks of clothes that were not just clothes but armor, impeccably tailored power suits in charcoal and navy, flowing silk dresses, sharp high-collared blouses. The simple neutral-colored loungewear she had lived in was packed away, a relic of a former life. Then came the hair. Her long dark hair, which she had always kept in a simple ponytail, was a symbol of the submissive wife. "Cut it," she told the stylist. "Cut it all." She sat in the chair watching in the mirror as 5 years of her life, of her submission, fell to the floor. The expert hands of the stylist moved with precision, transforming the shapeless mass into a short, sharp, asymmetrical bob. It was an elegant, sophisticated ash brown. It was the hair of a woman who was not to be trifled with. Finally, the makeup artists. They did not just cover the fading bruise on her cheek. They used makeup to erase the fatigue, to highlight her strong cheekbones, to give her an air of intellectual authority. They shaped her brows. They gave her a bold red lip that felt like a declaration of war. When they were finished, she stood and looked in the mirror. She did not recognize herself. The woman in the mirror was a stranger. She was elegant. She was beautiful. She was powerful. She was intimidating. But then as she stared longer, she realized she was not a stranger at all. This was the person she should have always been. This was the woman she was before Andre. This was the summa cum laude graduate. This was the woman her parents had raised. This was the woman Pops had invested in. This was the woman who had been buried alive for 5 years. A deep, intense, dazzling confidence began to bloom from within her. It was not a costume. It was her skin reclaimed. But the transformation was not just external. The clothes and the makeup were armor, but the real change was happening beneath the surface. It was a hardening of her mind. Monique dove into the work of the Sterling Group with a ferocity that stunned the staff. She was no longer a guest. She was the vice president. She was the first one in the office and the last one to leave long after Pops himself had retired for the evening. She devoured financial reports. She analyzed projections. She studied investment portfolios. The knowledge from her college degree, the analytical skills she had honed as a junior analyst before Andre, all of it came rushing back. But it was different now. It was not the abstract, hopeful knowledge of a 22-year-old. It was sharpened by 5 years of bitter life experience. She no longer just looked at numbers. She looked for the lie behind the numbers. She had a PhD in deceit courtesy of her husband, and it made her a formidable businesswoman. She began to speak in meetings. At first, there were skeptical glances. The boardroom was filled with the old guard executives in their 50s and 60s who had served Pops for decades. They were men who remembered her as the skinny, tragic girl at her adoptive father's funeral. They saw her in her sharp new suits as a privileged granddaughter, a victim Pops was trying to distract with a vanity title. That all changed during the quarterly review of the acquisitions department. The room was heavy with debate. They were discussing a risky merger with a mid-level tech company out of Austin. The company looked good on paper, but the price was high and the technology was volatile. "It's too risky, Robert," said a senior executive named Harrison, his hands flat on the table. "This isn't our core business. It's unproven. We should pass." The other men murmured in agreement. The consensus was to avoid the risk. "You're looking at the wrong variable." Monique's voice cut through the room clear and cold. The murmuring stopped. Every man at the table turned to look at her, sitting halfway down the table, a stark slash of color in the gray room. She had not just read the summary. She had spent 3 sleepless nights digging through the raw data, the appendices, the footnotes that everyone else ignored. She stood up, a single sheet of paper in her hand. She walked to the front of the room, her heels clicking decisively on the marble floor. "Mr. Harrison is right," she said, her voice projecting confidence. "The technology is volatile. It's not the asset. Their data pipeline is. But you've all missed the liability." She placed the paper on the projector. It was a single clause buried on page 94 of the compliance report. "This," she said, tapping the glass, "this clause indicates they are not in compliance with international data privacy regulations. It's a minor note here, but I cross-referenced it with their European expansion plans. It's not a minor problem. It's a ticking time bomb. The moment they expand, they are open to fines that could bankrupt them in 6 months." A heavy silence fell over the room. Harrison looked stunned. The other executives were scrambling through their own reports, realizing she had found something they had all missed. "So we pass," Harrison said, his voice flat. "No," Monique said. "We don't. We use this. We don't buy the company. We leverage this compliance failure. We let Mr. Franklin draft a new offer. We acquire their data patent and their existing pipeline at a 30% discount, and we let the main company dissolve under its own liability. We cut the risk, secure the asset, and get what we actually want for a fraction of the cost." She looked around the table. The skepticism was gone. In its place was a new, grudging, profound respect. These men did not care about her haircut or her pain. They cared about power and money, and she had just shown them how to secure both. She walked back to her seat. Pops at the head of the table had not said a word. He just watched her, and a small, intensely proud smile touched the corner of his lips. After that meeting, everything changed. Pops began to entrust her with more. She was no longer just reviewing reports. She was involved in negotiations with principal partners. She was making decisions. Her confidence no longer came from her clothes. It came from her own ability. She was no longer intimidated by inquisitive looks. She had recovered her own voice. Her transformation was not limited to the boardroom. She began to rebuild her social life, attending industry parties and charity events. She presented herself with this new image, an elegant, beautiful, intelligent, and charismatic businesswoman. The media, which had briefly covered Andre's arrest for domestic violence, began to take notice of her for a different reason. The narrative shifted. They stopped referring to her as the victim of a sensational divorce. They started talking about the princess returning to the Sterling Empire, the new rising star of the business world. Monique knew all of this would reach Andre's ears. She wanted him to see it. She wanted him to know that the woman he had abandoned, the woman he had called a parasite, was now in a position he could never, ever reach. 6 months. 6 months had passed since the night of the storm. 6 months of safety. 6 months of waking up to the sound of birds in the Hamptons, not the sound of Andre's keys in the lock. 6 months of relentless physical therapy. Her leg, which the doctor had confirmed was not broken, but had suffered severe nerve and tissue damage, no longer ached with a fiery electric pain. The limp was almost gone easily, masked by the confident, steady click of her new, expensive heels. 6 months of being Vice President Monique Sterling. Her life had stabilized, settling into a new, demanding rhythm. Work, therapy, and Amara. Then she met Jamal. It was at a high-profile charity fundraiser for the Children's Defense Fund. He was not like Andre. Andre had been a supernova of flashy charm, all teeth and ambition and intoxicating promises. Jamal, at 37 years old, was solid. He was an architect, successful and respected in his own right, with a quiet, steady presence that seemed to generate its own gravity. His eyes were kind, and when he smiled it was slow and genuine. He knew who she was, of course. The press had been fascinated by her story, The Sterling Princess, reclaimed from a life of anonymous abuse. He had read the articles, but he did not look at her with the invasive pity she had come to expect from strangers. He looked at her with an open admiration that felt foreign and very, very real. Their first date was coffee that lasted for 3 hours. Their second was a quiet dinner where they talked about books and jazz. Their third date, he came to the mansion. Amara, who was still fragile, who flinched at loud masculine voices, had been wary at first. Jamal did not try to win her over. He simply sat on the floor with her, and for an hour he helped her build the most complex block castle the playroom had ever seen. He was patient. He was gentle. And when it was time for him to leave, Amara, who had not initiated a hug with any man other than Pops, ran to him and wrapped her small arms around his legs. That was the moment Monique's carefully constructed defenses began to crumble. He was everything Andre was not. He was patient where Andre was demanding. He was supportive where Andre was jealous. He celebrated her victories in the boardroom instead of belittling them. He held her on the rare nights she woke up from a nightmare about Andre, and he did not offer cheap solutions or empty platitudes. He just offered quiet, solid strength until the shaking stopped. For the first time in nearly 6 years, Monique began to believe in a future that was not just about survival, but about happiness. She was terrifyingly starting to trust. The legal battle, however, was far from over. Mr. Franklin was not just handling a divorce. He was methodically, relentlessly building a massive criminal case. Andre's assets were frozen, and his company Golden Future was in a death spiral, bleeding investors and partners. But Monique wanted more than just his bankruptcy. She wanted him and Vanessa held criminally accountable for the $500,000 in fraud. She wanted them in a courtroom. She wanted a sentence. Jamal came to the mansion on a Tuesday night. Amara was already asleep. He had brought takeout from her favorite Thai restaurant, hoping for a rare, quiet evening. He found her in the grand dining room, but she was not alone. Mr. Franklin was there. The massive mahogany table, which could seat 20, was not set for dinner. It was covered end to end with bank statements, wire transfer receipts, corporate filings from Delaware, and complex hand-drawn diagrams tracing the flow of her money. Monique was not the warm, laughing woman he had taken to dinner. She was a general in her war room. She wore sharp reading glasses, her face was tight with concentration, and her voice was a sharp clinical clip. "He's trying to hide an offshore account in the Caymans," she was saying, tapping a highlighted ledger. "This transfer to a shell holdings company. It's sloppy. He's getting desperate. I want you to subpoena their records. We'll find it." Jamal stood in the doorway, the bag of cooling food in his hand. He waited. For almost 2 hours, he waited in the living room, listening to the low, intense murmur of their strategy. When Mr. Franklin finally left, looking exhausted, Monique walked into the living room rubbing her temples. "Hey," she said, her mind clearly still on the spreadsheets. "I'm so sorry. I lost track of time." "That looked intense," Jamal said. His voice was quiet, neutral, but she could feel a tension in him she had not felt before. "It's just details," she said, waving it off. "We've almost got him. He's trapped." Jamal sighed, a deep sound of frustration that startled her. "Mo," he said, turning to face her, "can we talk? Really talk?" "What is it?" she asked, a small knot of apprehension forming in her stomach. "I love you," he said, and the words were heavy, not light. "You know that, and I love Amara, but I don't know how to compete with this." He gestured back toward the dining room, toward the mountain of paper that represented her past. "Compete?" she said, baffled. "Jamal, that's Mr. Franklin. That's the case." "I know what it is," he said, and his kind eyes were filled with a deep, profound sadness. "It's your obsession. Mo, look at yourself. It's been 6 months. You're safe. Amara is safe. He is finished. His company is bankrupt. He's a social pariah. Isn't that enough?" Monique felt a cold shock, as if he had just thrown a bucket of ice water on her. "Enough. He's still walking free, Jamal. He's not in jail." "The trial is in 6 more months." Jamal pressed his voice earnest, pleading. "Let the lawyers handle it. Let the law do its job. Why are you spending every night, every free second digging through this trash? Why are you still letting him take up all the air in your life, in our life?" She stepped back, stunned. It felt like a betrayal. "He stole $500,000 from me, Jamal. He stole my parents' legacy. He beat me. He beat me in front of my daughter. This isn't about air. This is about justice. I thought you understood that." "I do understand," he said, reaching for her, but she recoiled and his hands dropped. "I know he did those terrible, unforgivable things, but revenge, Mo. Revenge won't make those things disappear. It won't heal those wounds." He sighed, his voice full of a gentle sorrow that she could not bear. It's just making you hard," he whispered. "It's making you cold. I see you in there looking at those papers. You're not the woman I'm falling in love with. You're someone else. Someone full of ice. Please, Mo, for your own sake, for us, let it go. Let him go. And live your life." Monique stared at him. He was a good man. He was kind and patient, and he loved her, and he did not understand. He did not, and he never could. He saw this as a choice between a dark past and a bright future. He could not see that for her the only path to that bright future led directly through the dark. This was not revenge. It was justice. It was the completion of a promise she had made to herself, the woman bleeding on the tile floor. He was asking her to let it go. He was asking her to abandon herself all over again for the comfort of a man. A terrible, painful truth settled in her heart. Even this good, kind, supportive man could not walk this final mile with her. He had never been where she had been. He had never seen what she had seen. He could not understand her absolute fundamental need to see the monster brought fully into the light and chained there. "I can't," she said, her voice quiet but absolute. The ice he saw was real and it was necessary. "I can't let it go." She looked at him, her eyes clear, her heart breaking in a new, different way. "This isn't for him, Jamal. It's for me. I have to finish this." He looked at her for a long time, the hope draining from his face. He saw her choice. He nodded a slow, sad acceptance. The crack had formed, and she knew in that moment that it would never be repaired. The break with Jamal had left a clean, cold ache. He was a good man, and his inability to understand her quest for justice felt like a different, more subtle kind of betrayal. It solidified a terrible, isolating truth. She was alone in this. Pops provided the weapons and Franklin provided the strategy, but the fight itself, the need for it, was hers and hers alone. She was in the study, staring at a financial chart she could not truly see when the housekeeper announced a new visitor. "A Mrs. Clara Patterson is here, ma'am." Monique's head snapped up. Aunt Clara, her adoptive mother's younger sister. Aunt Clara, at 60 years old, was a force of nature. A sharp, practical, impeccably dressed woman from Atlanta who wore her pearls like armor and who Monique suddenly remembered had never not once trusted Andre. Clara did not wait to be seated. She marched into the study, her sharp eyes sweeping over Monique. She took in the new suit, the powerful haircut, the fading bruise, and the file-covered desk. She did not offer pity. She offered a fierce, sudden hug that smelled of gardenias and unshakable strength. "Well," Clara said, pulling back her eyes sharp and knowing, "it's about time. I knew this day would come." Monique's throat tightened. "You knew." "Of course I knew," Clara sniffed. "Your mother, may she rest in peace, is probably rattling the gates of heaven, child, crying over what that no-account, low-life man did to you." She sat down, her back rigid, and opened her alligator purse. "I never trusted him. Not from the wedding. His eyes were too shifty and he smiled too much." She pulled out a thick bank envelope and placed it firmly on the desk. "This is yours." "Aunt Clara, what is this?" Monique asked. "It's the money I've been sending you for 2 years. A little every month for your birthday, a little for Amara's. Just $100 here, $200 there." Monique stared at the envelope. I never received any money from you." "Of course you didn't," Clara said, her voice sharp with vindication. "You think I'm a fool. I knew that man was a thief the second I laid eyes on him. I knew he was controlling your mail, controlling your life. I opened a private post office box in your maiden name, Monique Patterson, 2 years ago. It's all in there. Every check I sent, all cashed and deposited for you. He was isolating you, baby, taking every penny he could." Monique's head was spinning. Andre had not just taken her inheritance. He had been actively intercepting her mail, stealing small gifts from her family for years. The pettiness of it was almost as shocking as the grand larceny. "But that is not the important part," Clara said, her voice dropping, losing its sharp edge and taking on a cold gravity. She reached back into her purse. "I have held on to this for 3 years. I never said anything, Monique. I swear I did not. I did not want to be the one to break up your home. I kept praying you would see the truth for yourself. I kept praying you would find your strength." "See what Auntie?" Monique whispered, a new dread creeping into her. Clara pulled out a single, slightly faded photograph and laid it on the desk. "Do you remember?" Clara said softly. "3 years ago, right after your father passed. You were a wreck, child. You were deep in your grief, barely eating. You were a ghost." Monique nodded, her stomach clenching. She remembered that fog of pain as if it were yesterday. "I had come up to help with the funeral arrangements," Clara continued. "I was at a restaurant in Midtown, picking up the catering you were too broken to even think about. And I saw him, your husband." Monique picked up the photograph. It was grainy, clearly taken from across a room with a phone, but it was unmistakable. It was Andre. He was sitting in a plush red booth, laughing, his head tilted intimately toward a beautiful younger woman, Vanessa Hayes. He was in the process of feeding her a bite of chocolate cake from his fork. Monique's blood did not run cold. It turned to acid. 3 years ago. Her father had just died. She had been at home drowning in the first paralyzing wave of grief, weeping into Andre's shoulder. He had held her, rocked her, and told her he was her family now, that he would take care of her. And while she was in mourning, he had been across town celebrating with his mistress, feeding her dessert. This was not just infidelity. This was a desecration. He had danced on her father's grave. He had feasted on her grief. "He is a demon, Monique," Clara said, her voice flat and hard. "Not just a cheat, a demon." Monique looked at the smiling face of the woman in the photo. She thought of Jamal's well-intentioned, naive plea. "Let it go. It's making you cold." She carefully placed the photograph on top of the financial reports. The ice he saw was not a choice. It was a shield. This new evidence was more than legal ammunition. It was the final, absolute justification. This was not a war she had started, but it was, by God, a war she was going to finish. The final preparations were underway. The chessboard was set. Mr. Franklin was coordinating with the district attorney's office, laying the groundwork for the arrests. The fictitious Singaporean investment fund, created entirely by Pops's legal team, was officially in play, And Andre, as expected, was ecstatic, his arrogance restored. The bait for the party was set. Monique was operating with a clinical, detached precision. Her focus was absolute, a narrow, bright line aimed at one single objective. Her relationship with Jamal, which had started with so much promise, was now a ghost. It existed in the polite, empty spaces they no longer shared, in the long silences over dinners they barely touched. He was waiting for her to soften, to let it go. She was waiting for the end. The call came on a Thursday evening. Her secure phone buzzed, and the name on the screen made her blood freeze. Leon. His name no longer sparked irritation, only a cold, familiar dread. She answered. It was not a conversation. It was a breakdown. She could barely understand him. He was not just crying. He was hysterical, his voice a raw, high-pitched wail of pure panic. "Mo, oh God, Mo, I'm so sorry. I'm so stupid. I'm so sorry." He said, "Leon," she said, her voice sharp and cold, a slap of reality to cut through his panic. "Breathe. Tell me exactly what you did." "It was Andre." He wept, the words tumbling out in a rush of snot and terror. "He came to me last week. He said you were being unreasonable, that you and Pops were trying to ruin him. He said he was broke. He just needed a little help. A bridge loan. He said if I just signed your name, just on this one loan guarantee, he would give me $20,000. The air in Monique's lungs turned to glass. "You forged my signature." "I didn't know." He shrieked, his voice cracking with a terror she knew was genuine. "I swear, Mo, I didn't know who they were. I thought it was just a bank thing. I needed the money. He promised, and now he's gone. His phone is disconnected, and these men are calling. They're not from a bank, Mo. They keep calling. They say I owe them the money. They say the guarantee is void because it's a forgery, and now I'm responsible for the full amount. They said if I don't have it by tomorrow, they're going to break my legs." Monique closed her eyes. She waited for the wave of disappointment, the familiar exhaustion, the anger at her brother. But nothing came. There was no sadness. There was only a profound Arctic calm. The rage was so cold, it felt like perfect stillness. Of course, this was Andre's final move. It was brilliant in its own sociopathic, desperate way. He knew Leon was her weak spot. He knew she had access to money. He knew with absolute certainty that she would never let her brother be physically harmed. This was not just a desperate act. This was a calculated final extortion. He was using her brother as a human shield. He was using Leon as bait to get one last final payout. He was forcing her to pay him again, even as he was being hunted. She did not hesitate. She did not yell at Leon. She simply asked, her voice flat, "Where are you?" "I'm at my apartment," he sobbed. "I'm scared, Mo." "Do not leave," she commanded. "Do not answer the door. Do not answer your phone. I will handle it." She hung up on his babbling grateful thanks. Her fingers immediately steadily dialed Mr. Franklin's secure line. "Franklin." "It's Monique," she said, her voice like steel. "Andre's final play. He used my brother. He convinced Leon to forge my signature on a fraudulent loan guarantee. I do not know the full amount, but it is enough to involve violent collectors. They are threatening him now." She took a breath. "I want you to find them. Find out the amount. Pay it. Pay it off in full before morning. Use my personal funds. I want those men gone, and I want this entire incident scrubbed." There was a heavy pause on the other end. "Monique," Mr. Franklin said, his voice cautious, "that is a significant risk. Paying them could be seen as validating the fraud. It could complicate matters." "I know," Monique said, "but there is a condition, my condition." She stared at her own reflection in the dark study window. "I want Leon Patterson brought to your office tomorrow morning, and I want him added to our witness list for the trial. He will testify in open court under oath exactly what Andre Garrett made him do. He will tell the jury how Andre used him to try and extort $20,000. He will be my final proof of Andre's character." "Monique, stop." Jamal was standing in the doorway. He had been there the whole time. He had heard all of it. His face was not sad, it was defeated. "You can't. he said, walking into the room. His voice was pleading. "You cannot be serious. You are throwing money into a black hole. You are paying off loan sharks for a man who betrayed you." "I am protecting my brother," Monique said, not looking at him, her gaze fixed on the dark glass. "No," Jamal said, his voice rising, frustrated. "You are buying another weapon to use against Andre, and you are using your brother to do it. This isn't protection. This is cold, Mo. Leon is a grown man. He made his choice. Let him face the consequences." She turned to him, then her face a mask of calm, unreadable ice. "Andre left me no choice. This is the cost of my freedom. This is the price to get him off my family's back permanently." Jamal stared at her. The warm, laughing woman he had met at the fundraiser was gone. In her place stood this queen, a woman moving chess pieces in a game he did not want to understand. "This isn't justice, Mo," he whispered, his voice full of a final, terrible sorrow. "This is an obsession. He said he wanted to ruin you. Don't let him win by turning you into him." He waited one last second, hoping for a sign, a flicker of the woman he loved. He saw nothing. He just saw Monique Sterling. He shook his head, a single sad gesture. I can't watch this." He turned and walked out of the study. A minute later, Monique heard the heavy front door of the mansion close quietly finally. She let him go. She did not cry. She simply turned back to the phone, waiting for Mr. Franklin to call her back with the details of the payment. She had made her choice. She chose justice over peace. The failure of Golden Future was not just a legal certainty, it was a social one. After Andre's arrest for domestic violence and the subsequent media whispers connecting Monique to the Sterling Empire, the financial world treated Andre like a plague. Partners who had once fawned over his charm now refused his calls. Investors who had been intrigued by his tech project pulled their funding, citing moral clauses. The company he and Vanessa had built with Monique's $500,000 was not just frozen. It was toxic. It was hemorrhaging money. The accounts Mr. Franklin had not managed to freeze were now being drained by creditors and lawsuits. Andre Garrett was no longer a rising star. He was a pariah. He was desperate. Monique needed to see that desperation for herself. It was a Saturday, almost 8 months after the night of the storm. She had a rare afternoon free from the boardroom. She told her driver she wanted to go shopping. She wanted to buy Amara a gift for her upcoming school performance. She drove the white convertible sports car Pops had given her, parking it in the valet line directly in front of Bergdorf Goodman, an upscale department store on Fifth Avenue. She knew Vanessa's social media. She knew this was one of her favorite haunts. Monique was not just shopping. She was hunting. She found the perfect dress on the 3rd floor in the luxury children's boutique. It was a confection of pink tulle and silk, a true princess dress. She was holding it up, imagining Amara's smile when she heard the voice, a familiar sharp nasal voice that set her teeth on edge. "Well, well, look who we have here." Monique turned, her heart not jumping with fear, but hardening with a cold, steady beat. There she was, Vanessa Hayes. And clinging to her arm, looking gray, thin, and haggard, was Andre. Vanessa was very pregnant now. Her belly was swollen and prominent under a tight, expensive leopard print dress. She wore it like a weapon, a trophy of her ultimate victory. "If it isn't the vice president?" Vanessa sneered, her eyes full of undisguised venom, raking Monique from head to toe. Her gaze lingered on the tailored suit, the flawless makeup. "You clean up nice, driving luxury cars, shopping in places like this." She laughed, a short, ugly sound. "You look pretty good for a woman who probably only set foot in flea markets before she met Andre." Andre looked profoundly awkward, his eyes darting around the store, terrified of who might see him. He gave a weak tug on Vanessa's arm. "Vanessa, come on, let's go." Vanessa shook him off, her gaze locked on Monique. She was enjoying this. She believed she was winning. "What's wrong, Cat? Got your tongue, or are you just mad he left you for a real woman? A woman who could give him a son?" Monique did not say a word. She just smiled. It was a small, cold, clinical smile. It was the smile of a biologist observing a microbe. She was not the woman on the floor anymore. She was not going to stoop to arguing with this creature. Her silence infuriated Vanessa even more. "How dare you? Are you finished?" Monique's voice was not loud. It was quiet. It was bored, and it cut through the air like a razor. Vanessa's face flushed a deep, ugly red. "I do not." Monique continued, her voice as smooth as ice. "Have time to take life lessons from a mistress, so if you will excuse me." She turned her back on them, a gesture of absolute dismissal. She walked to the marble checkout counter and placed the pink dress on its surface. The clerk, sensing the immense unspoken tension, looked nervous. Monique reached into her purse and purposefully pulled out the card Pops had given her. It was not a plastic consumer card. It was a heavy matte black card forged from metal, the Sterling Group Unlimited corporate card. The clerk's eyes widened to the size of saucers. Her entire demeanor changed. "Right away, Ms. Sterling," she gushed. "Will that be all for you today, Ms. Sterling?" Monique saw their reflection in the mirror behind the counter. Andre and Vanessa were frozen, staring at that card. They knew exactly what it represented. It was not just money. It was unlimited power. It was a kingdom they had tried to steal from and failed. Monique took the pristine bag, thanked the clerk, and walked out of the store. She did not give them a backward glance. She walked past them as if they were statues, irrelevant. She had taken perhaps 10 steps into the main aisle when Andre's voice called out, raw and desperate. "Monique, wait, please." She stopped, but she did not turn around. She heard his hurried, clumsy footsteps approaching. "Mo, please," he said, his voice a low, pleading whine. It was pathetic. It was the voice of a beaten dog. "I know I made a mistake. I know I messed up. But please, you can't ruin my life completely. You have to call them off." She turned slowly, savoring the look on his face. The arrogance was gone. The rage was gone. All that remained was a terrified, hollowed-out shell. "The company," he stammered, his hands twisting together. "It's on the verge of bankruptcy. Golden Future is finished. Everyone left. The accounts. I can't. If you just said a word to your grandpa, if you just helped me a little. For Amara's sake." A true mocking smile formed on her lips. It was a cruel smile, and she relished it. "Ruin your life, Andre," she repeated, her voice dripping with contempt. "You want to talk about ruined lives?" She took a step closer, forcing him to meet her cold, steady gaze. "Do you remember what you and your mother and that thing tried to do to me? Steal my savings, steal my inheritance, take my daughter. Compared to what you did, your company going bankrupt is nothing. It is a paper cut." "But that was all I had," he whispered, his eyes filling with tears of self-pity. "And my youth," she snapped, her voice sharp. "My trust, my sacrifices, my dignity. Who compensates me for that? Be satisfied I am leaving it at this. Now get out of my way." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking decisively on the marble floor, leaving him standing there, stunned, ashen, and completely defeated. As she walked to her car, the sun bright on her face, she was not angry. She was energized. Seeing his desperation had been the final confirmation. But it was not enough. Bankruptcy was not enough. She wanted public humiliation. She wanted him brought low, not in private, but in front of the world he so desperately wanted to impress. He was desperate for a lifeline. And as she started the engine, the idea clicked into place, fully formed and absolutely perfect. She would give him one, a golden shining lifeline, and it would be attached to an anchor. That night, she was back in the war room with Pops and Mr. Franklin. "He is desperate," she said, her voice brimming with a new cold excitement. "He needs money and he needs validation. We are going to give him both." The plan was meticulously crafted. Mr. Franklin, through a third-party contact in Asia, created a fictitious Singaporean venture capital fund. They called it Apex Global Ventures. They created a flawless website, a history, a portfolio. They reached out to Andre, posing as investors who had heard through the grapevine about his innovative technology project, the same fraudulent project he had used to lure other investors. They were interested, they said, very interested. They promised an investment of $35 million. For Andre, a man drowning in debt and facing criminal charges, $35 million was not just a lifeline. It was a resurrection. It was the validation he craved. It was proof that he was a genius, that Monique and Pops were the ones who were wrong. He took the bait without a second of hesitation. He sent them all his fraudulent project information, his fake projections, his company presentations. He had no idea he was handing Mr. Franklin and the district attorney the final damning evidence needed for the aggravated fraud charges. As a final step, the investors told him they would be in New York and wished to attend his upcoming customer appreciation party to officially sign the agreement in public. Andre, euphoric, spent the very last of his money undoubtedly borrowing more from Vanessa to prepare a lavish, spectacular party at a five-star hotel in Midtown. He needed to impress his saviors. He invited all the former partners who had abandoned him. He invited journalists from major media outlets. This would not just be a signing, it would be his spectacular comeback. He did not know he was meticulously setting the stage for his own execution. The ballroom at the five-star hotel was a cathedral of wealth glittering with crystal chandeliers and the desperate hopes of its host. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the sound of a string quartet. Andre Garrett, his face flushed with triumph, stood at the entrance in a flawless tuxedo, his arm wrapped possessively around Vanessa Hayes. Vanessa, in a fitted floor-length gown that deliberately flaunted her advanced pregnancy, was radiant. She moved through the room laughing and chatting, the perfect hostess, the queen of the comeback. They were a power couple poised at the peak of success, receiving their guests with confident smiles, completely unaware they were welcoming the audience to their own downfall. The party was at its peak. The champagne was flowing. The chatter was at its loudest. And then the grand ballroom doors suddenly silently swung open. The music faltered. The chatter died, replaced by a wave of curious whispers. All eyes fixed on the entrance. Monique stood there, a column of midnight black silk. Her simple backless evening gown was elegant and severe, a stark contrast to the room's gaudy gold. Her dark hair was pulled back into an elegant tight updo, revealing the cold, magnificent sparkle of diamond earrings. Her lips were painted a deep confrontational red. She was not a victim, she was a verdict. Beside her, a pillar of gray-suited power, was Robert "Pops" Sterling. Behind them, his face impassive, carrying a slim leather briefcase, was Mr. Franklin. Andre and Vanessa, standing by the stage, had their smiles frozen. They shattered. Andre's face lost all its color, draining to a pasty, sickly white. He hurried toward them, his confident stride replaced by a panicked, clumsy shuffle. He was stuttering. "Monique, Pops, Mr. Sterling, what are you doing here?" Monique smiled. It was a small, cold, utterly terrifying smile. "Can't we be here?" she asked, her voice light and clear. "I heard Golden Future has an important event today, and a big investor from Singapore is coming." "But we did not send you an invitation?" Andre stammered. His eyes darting to Pops, then back to her. "Oh, really?" Monique replied. She reached into her small clutch and produced the golden invitation. "And what is this? I suppose one of your employees made a mistake." Andre was speechless. He was trapped. In front of his entire network, in front of the media he had invited, he could not turn away the president of the Sterling Group. He had to force a smile, his lips twitching, and guide them to the VIP table he had prepared. The party tried to restart, but the atmosphere had completely changed. The air was no longer festive. It was tense, electric, with whispers. All attention was no longer on Andre. It was on the silent, formidable trio at the center table. Andre, realizing he was losing the room, hurried to the stage. He had to regain control. He grabbed the microphone, his hand visibly shaking. He tried to regain his confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice too loud. He talked about Golden Future's vision, about the innovative technology project that would change the world. He painted a bright and promising future, his words growing more passionate, more desperate. In the front row, Vanessa gazed up at him, her eyes full of pride. "And today," Andre said, his voice emotional, "we have the great honor of welcoming an important investor from Singapore. This collaboration will be the wing that allows Golden Future to fly higher and farther." Just as he was in the middle of his passionate, triumphant speech, the enormous LED screen projecting the Golden Future logo behind him suddenly went blank. A murmur swept through the ballroom. Andre stopped, disconcerted. He turned, tapping the microphone, not understanding what was happening. He motioned frantically to the technical team in the back, but no one responded. And then, to everyone's astonishment, the screen lit up again. It was not the Golden Future logo. The first image was a high-resolution, brutally clear photograph of Monique's face taken the morning after that fateful night. Her eyes were swollen shut. Her cheekbone was a grotesque map of purple and yellow. Her lip was split. Next to it, in large, stark white letters, were the words, "This is the true face of love." The ballroom fell into a deathly, absolute silence. The background music stopped. Everyone held their breath. Andre's paper-white face turned a sickly green. He pointed at the screen with a trembling hand, stammering, "What is this? What? Turn it off! Turn it off right now!" But it was too late. The screen switched. This time it was a video, a grainy, undeniable security camera recording taken from the corner of the South Bronx apartment. It showed Andre grabbing Monique's hair, pulling her head back. It showed him kicking her hard in the leg. The audio was on. The sharp thwack of his hand, the dull thud of the kick, and Monique's choked cry of pain echoed through the ballroom's perfect sound system. The murmurs turned into audible gasps and cries of horror. "My God," a woman whispered. "What a beast." Vanessa in the front row was frozen, her hands clamped over her mouth, her eyes wide with panic. The show was not over. The screen continued to flash, photos of Andre and Vanessa laughing on a beach in Miami, happy family photos with their secret son blowing out candles on a birthday cake with a large number 2, and then dense bank statements. A red arrow clearly showing a transfer of $500,000 from Monique's inheritance account directly into the account for Golden Future Investments, LLC. And as the final devastating blow, an audio file was played. The sound of Andre's voice, confident and full of contempt, boomed through the room. "That woman is naive and trusts anyone," his voice sneered. "She's easy to fool. As soon as you ask for money, she gives it without question." When the recording ended, the ballroom erupted. The silence turned into a wave of pure, unfiltered fury. Insults and looks of contempt were directed at the stage. "Scammer, rotten thing, thief, abuser." The investors and partners who had moments before listened to Andre's speech now looked at him like he was a monster. Andre stood on the stage as if struck by lightning, trembling from head to toe. Everything had collapsed. He looked at Monique, who was still seated watching him with cold, calm eyes. He knew this was all her. It was then that Monique calmly stood up. She walked toward the stage, her heels clicking with a slow, deliberate rhythm, parting the horrified crowd. She walked up the small steps. She took the microphone from a stunned staff member who did not even think to stop her. She looked Andre directly in the eyes. His entire body was shaking. "Andre Garrett," she said, her voice cold but clear enough for every person in the room to hear. "Your performance was magnificent, but it's time to bring down the curtain." She turned her gaze, sweeping across the stunned, silent audience. Her voice gained strength, ringing with the authority of her newfound power. "Ladies and gentlemen, I am Monique Sterling, the wife of the man on this stage. What you have just seen," she continued, "is only a small part of the truth. Today I am not here to lament my pain. I am here to unmask a professional scammer and an abuser who hides behind the mask of a successful entrepreneur." She held up a thick bundle of papers, the evidence Mr. Franklin had so meticulously prepared. "In my hands, I have all the evidence of Golden Future's scams, embezzlement, commercial fraud, and tax evasion. That innovative project he just spoke about is nothing more than a fairy tale to steal your money." "Shut up!" The word was a bestial roar. The last thread of Andre's control finally snapped. He lunged not at the microphone, but at her, his face a mask of pure, murderous hatred. "You bitch, I'll kill you." He never made it 2 steps. The 2 bodyguards who had flanked Pop's men, who had been standing silently by the stage, moved with a speed that was terrifying. They intercepted him mid-lunge, grabbing his arms and slamming him face first onto the stage floor before he could even blink. He struggled, thrashing and cursing, pinned and immobilized. Across the room, Vanessa Hayes, seeing the situation was irreversible, saw her lover go down and made her choice. She abandoned him. Clutching her swollen belly, she tried to slip out of the ballroom, a ghost, disappearing into the chaos. She never made it to the door. Just as Andre was pinned, the main ballroom doors burst open again. This time it was not a grand entrance. It was a tactical one. A group of uniformed police officers, led by a high-ranking official with a stern, tired face, filed into the room. Their presence silenced the remaining murmurs. The official, who had clearly been waiting for this exact moment, walked quickly toward the stage. He looked down at the struggling, pathetic man on the floor and showed him a document with an official seal. "Andre Garrett," the official's voice boomed, cutting through the silence. "You are under arrest for the alleged crimes of aggravated fraud, embezzlement, serious assault, and commercial fraud. You must accompany us to the precinct to give a statement." Every word was a hammer blow, shattering the last fragments of Andre's resistance. He stopped struggling. His entire body went slack. He stared blankly at the floor, his eyes dead. He knew it was truly, finally over. 2 officers approached, pulled his hands behind his back, and applied the handcuffs. The metallic click of the shackles closing echoed in the silence, a sharp, definitive sound. He was hauled to his feet, a defeated dog, and escorted out through the crowd that had once admired him. Simultaneously, another police team, already dispatched by Mr. Franklin, arrived at Vanessa Hayes' luxurious apartment. She had just fled the party, and before she could even recover from the shock, she found justice waiting at her door. Faced with the inspectors, the overwhelming evidence, and the panic of her advanced pregnancy, Vanessa did not maintain her defiance. She broke. She broke completely. In a desperate, sobbing attempt to get a lighter sentence to save her unborn child, she confessed everything. She admitted to the plan, to the fraud, to the shell company. She betrayed Andre Garrett without a second thought. Back in the ballroom, the drama was not quite over. Andre's mother, Clarissa, who had been watching from a side table, saw her beloved son handcuffed. She saw her dreams of wealth and power vanishing like smoke. She let out a single piercing shriek and fainted on the spot, collapsing to the floor. Monique watched all of it from the stage. She watched Andre get cuffed. She watched Vanessa get intercepted. She watched Clarissa faint. In her heart, there was no euphoria. There was no victory. There was just a profound, strange, and total peace. Justice had finally been served. Pops approached and placed a heavy, warm hand on her shoulder. "It's over, my granddaughter." She nodded, the tension of the last 8 months, the last 5 years finally leaving her body. A single tear rolled down her cheek. It was not a tear of sadness. It was a tear of liberation. 6 months later. The trial was a formality, but a necessary one. It received exceptional attention from the public and the media. Monique attended every single day. She was not the victim this time. She was the chief witness. On the day of the verdict, she entered the federal courthouse, not in a victim's somber black, but in an elegant, razor-sharp white suit. Her makeup was light. Her expression was serene. She was not here for revenge. She was here to close the book. In the defendant's box, the 3 of them were pathetic. Andre was haggard, his hair graying, his eyes sunken and dead. He did not dare lift his head. Vanessa, who had given birth in custody, wept silently. Clarissa, who had suffered a stroke after her collapse, sat in a wheelchair, her mouth twisted, her eyes burning with a hateful, impotent rage. The judge, an elderly man with a stern face, began to read. "This court, after examining all the evidence and testimonies, hands down the following sentence. The accused, Andre Garrett, is convicted of the crimes of serious assault, aggravated fraud, and embezzlement to a sentence of 20 years in state prison." 20 years. Andre slumped, covering his face. The accused, Vanessa Hayes, is convicted as an accomplice to fraud, to a sentence of 7 years in federal prison. The accused, Clarissa Garrett, is convicted of the crimes of defamation and cover-up, to a suspended sentence of 3 years. The judge's gavel struck the wood with a hard, definitive crack. It was done. The gavel had fallen. Justice was a cold, hard number. 20 years for Andre, 7 for Vanessa, 3 suspended for Clarissa. It was over. Monique walked out of the federal courthouse not into the bright sunshine of victory, but into a strange, hollow quiet. She had won. She had taken her power back. She had annihilated her enemies. The media hailed her as a symbol of strength, a survivor who had fought back and reclaimed her empire. But when she returned to the Hamptons mansion, to the sprawling, silent halls that had been her fortress, the victory turned to ash in her mouth. She had won the war, but she was losing her daughter. Amara, her bright, clever 4-year-old Amara, was gone. In her place was a tiny ghost, a silent, watchful child who flinched when a door closed too loudly, who dropped her toys and covered her ears if a voice was raised even in laughter. She was plagued by nightmares. She woke up screaming, not with words, but with a high, thin animal sound of pure terror, her small body rigid, her eyes wide and staring at a horror only she could see. And worst of all, she had for the most part stopped speaking. She had retreated into a new kind of prison, a fortress of silence that Monique, with all her new power, her sharp suits, and her boardroom victories, could not penetrate. Monique stood in her new office at the Sterling Group headquarters, a vast room with a wall of glass overlooking the city. A multi-million-dollar merger agreement, one she had personally negotiated, sat on her desk. She looked at the signature line. Then she looked at a drawing Amara had made in her playroom. It was not a drawing of a house or a flower. It was a single violent black scribble filling the entire page corner to corner. She picked up her secure line. "Pops," she said, her voice clear and absolute, the voice of a chief executive officer making a decision. "I'm stepping away, indefinitely." There was no argument on the other end, only a quiet, understanding sigh. "Go," he said. "Be a mother. The empire will wait." Monique took off the armor of the boardroom. She packed away the sharp suits and the blood-red lipstick. This was a new, more terrifying battle, and it required a different kind of strength. She took Amara to the best child psychologist in New York, a warm, patient woman named Dr. Evelyn Hayes. The first sessions were brutal. Amara sat on the floor, her back to the doctor, her small shoulders rigid. "How do I fix this?" Monique asked the CEO, in her demanding an action plan, a timeline, a result. "You don't fix her, Ms. Sterling," Dr. Hayes explained gently, her voice kind but firm. "She is not a broken project. She is a child carrying an impossible burden. She is not just traumatized by the violence she witnessed. She is traumatized by the violence she stopped." Monique felt a cold sickness. "What do you mean?" In her 4-year-old mind, the doctor continued, she has connected 2 facts. 1, her father was there. 2, she made a phone call. 3, her father was taken away and never came back. She does not see herself as a hero. She sees herself as the person responsible for destroying her family. Monique had to sit down the air, leaving her lungs. "Oh my God." "You don't fix," Dr. Hayes repeated. "You listen. You validate. You sit with her in the silence, and you make it safe. You must stop being the vice president. You must stop being the victor. You must simply be her mother. She needs to know, not just in her head, but in her bones, that she is safe, and that you are safe." So Monique learned a new language, not the language of finance, but the language of patience. She sat on the floor of the therapy room for hours, just existing. She learned to listen to Amara's silence. At home, she held her daughter through every single nightmare. "It was not your fault," she would whisper into Amara's hair night after night. "Mommy is safe. You saved Mommy. You are my hero. You are so brave." She took Amara away from the city, away from the courtrooms and the mansions and the whispers. She took her to places with blue sea and white sand. They went to the coast, just the 2 of them. They built sandcastles, their hands in the wet, clean earth. They flew kites. Monique, who had been focused on balance sheets and depositions, now focused on the simple physical act of keeping a piece of painted paper in the air. She wanted to show Amara that the world was not just the small, dark apartment, that it was not just angry voices and slamming doors. She wanted to show her that the world was big and bright and full of beautiful, safe things. And slowly, so slowly, Amara began to change. One afternoon, while flying a bright yellow kite, the string snapped. The kite sailed away, a yellow speck against the blue sky. Monique braced for tears. Instead, Amara, who had not made a joyful sound in almost a year, let out a small, surprising sound. It was a laugh, a real, genuine giggle. It was the most beautiful sound Monique had ever heard. They enrolled in art classes together. At first, Amara's paintings were the same as her drawing. Dark, violent scribbles of black and red. Monique did not flinch. She just painted beside her painting suns and flowers. Then one day, Amara picked up the yellow paint. She painted a small, bright circle in the corner of her dark paper. The sun was coming out. They played the piano, clumsy, simple notes filling the house with sound. Amara, who had been silent, began to hum. And then she began to talk. In the process of healing her daughter, Monique was healing herself. As she watched Amara's fears recede, she felt the block of ice in her own chest, the cold, hard resolve that had won her the war, begin to melt. She stopped thinking about Andre. She stopped hating Vanessa. She realized that holding on to that hatred, that cold, righteous fury, was just another way of letting them win. It was a poison she was drinking, expecting them to die. Forgiveness. It was not a word she was ready for, not in the traditional sense. She would never forgive him for what he did. But she understood it now. Forgiveness was not about him. It was not about forgetting. It was not about absolving him of his sins. He deserved his 20-year sentence, every single day of it. Forgiveness was about her. It was about releasing herself from the endless, exhausting burden of his memory. She forgave not because he deserved it, but because she deserved peace. A year after the trial, she returned to the Sterling Group. She was not the same woman who had left. The ice was gone, replaced by a warm-tempered steel. Pops called her into his study. He did not push her back toward acquisitions. He handed her a different folder. "Your battle is over," he said, his eyes kind. "Now it's time to choose your peace." The folder was filled with the group's philanthropic projects, building schools in rural areas, funding social housing. She flipped through the pages, appreciative but unmoved. Then her gaze stopped. It stopped on a new proposal, a project still in its infancy, waiting for a leader. It was called the Serenity Home, a support center and transitional housing facility for women and children who were victims of domestic violence. Her heart did not just leap, it settled. This was it. This was the reason. She wanted, with every fiber of her being, to use her story, her money, and her strength to help other women. She wanted to stand at the gates of the hell she had escaped and pull others out. This was not just a project. This was her path. 3 years. It is not a very long time, but it was enough. Enough for the deepest wounds to fade from agonizing open cuts to pale silvery scars. It was enough for the violent storm in her heart to become a serene, quiet lake. People say that time heals everything. Monique learned that was a lie. Time alone does nothing. It is just a space. Whether you fill that space with healing or you let it fester is a choice. She chose to fill it. Amara was no longer a tiny ghost. She was a bright, talkative, self-assured second grader. The trace of fear that had haunted her eyes, the flinch at loud noises, had completely disappeared. It was replaced by a clear, curious, and brilliant joy for life. She no longer woke up startled in the night. Instead, she bounded into Monique's room in the mornings, chattering about school, about books, about the castle she was building. Seeing her whole and happy, Monique knew every agonizing step of the fight had been worth it. The Serenity Home had flourished. What had started as a single center was now a solid, powerful network, a common home for hundreds of disadvantaged women and children. Monique was not just a sponsor observing from afar. She was their sister. She spent 2 afternoons every week at the center, not to supervise but to listen. She listened to the story of a single mother who, after 10 years of abuse, had bravely escaped with her 2 children. The woman told her through tears that it was Monique's story, which she saw on television, that gave her the final terrifying strength to leave. "I looked at you," the woman said, "and I thought if she could do it, why can't I?" She listened to the story of a 17-year-old girl who had arrived one stormy night with empty hands and a broken heart, and who was now back in school, slowly fulfilling her dream of becoming a fashion designer. Helping them, she healed herself. She finally understood. The best way to overcome your own pain is not to bury it. It is to turn it into a torch and use it to light the way for others who are still lost in the darkness. Sometimes, in moments of quiet, she thought about Andre's family. Even without seeking the news, it reached her. Vanessa Hayes, released from prison after serving her sentence, had quietly left the city with her son, who was now a young boy. She had moved to a distant town, changed her name, and started a new anonymous life. Clarissa Garrett, consumed by grief and illness, had ended up dying alone in a state nursing home. And Andre. 20 years is a long sentence. He was paying for his sins day by day behind cold bars. Monique felt nothing, not hatred, not satisfaction. The anger of that final year had subsided, leaving only a nearly cold indifference. They had written the end of their own lives. Under Pops's guidance, her work at the Sterling Group was no longer a challenge. It was her passion. She had proven to everyone, and most importantly to herself, that she could stand on her own. She was no longer the vice president. She was Sophia Monique Sterling, the chief executive officer, the woman who had successfully navigated the company through a global economic crisis and expanded the Sterling brand throughout Asia. One weekend afternoon, the sky was clear, the ocean breeze was fresh. Monique, Pops, and Amara took a trip to the California coast. The sunset was slowly falling, painting the sky and the sea in shades of gold and rose. Amara was building a huge sand castle with other local children, her clear crystalline laughter mingling with the sound of the waves. Pops, who had aged his hair, now a silver white, sat on a wooden bench watching her. His joy was no longer in the boardroom. It was here, watching his great-granddaughter. "Look at her," Pop said, his voice thick with a happiness so profound it was almost tangible. Monique smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. "Thank you, Pops, for everything." "Silly girl." He stroked her hair. "You earned this. You earned all of it." And just then, a deep, warm voice sounded behind them. "Good afternoon, Mr. Sterling. Monique, I hope I'm not interrupting." Monique turned, and her heart, without her intending it, to beat a little faster. It was David, the talented, kind architect she had met on the Serenity Home project. He had not come as a paid partner. He had come as a volunteer, dedicating his free time to designing beautiful, dignified living spaces for the women. He knew her past every dark detail, but he had never, not once, looked at her with pity. He only looked at her with respect. "David." She smiled, a natural, easy smile. "Just watching the sunset." Pops looked at Monique. He looked at David. He smiled, a mischievous, knowing smile. He stood up, leaning on his cane. "I'm going to see how our Amara's castle is coming along," he said. "You two talk quietly." He walked toward the beach, leaving them their space. David sat down beside her, not too close, but not too far. They watched the sunset in a comfortable, easy silence. "You look different today, Monique," David said suddenly. "You are not the CEO from the meeting room or the dedicated founder from the center." "And how do I look?" she asked, a little curious. He turned his eyes sincere and warm. "You look serene," he said. "You look peaceful, like the sea after a storm." Monique smiled, a real smile, bright and unburdened. Beside him, she did not need to be strong. She could just be. Her eyes met his, and she knew with a quiet, steady certainty that a new, sincere, and tender love was beginning to knock on the door of her heart. She was no longer afraid of love. She finally understood. It is not love itself that hurts us. It is loving the wrong person. And she deserved to be loved. She deserved to be happy. She looked toward the horizon where the sun had just disappeared. But the last rays of light still illuminated the sky, bright and hopeful. The storm was behind her, and ahead was only blue sky. The highest form of justice isn't revenge. It's healing so completely that your tormentor no longer holds any power over you. True strength is rebuilding your life from the ashes and then using that fire not to burn others, but to light the way for those still trapped in the dark.